Welcome to the Puzzle of Us, where we are helping you pick up the broken pieces of marriage, life, and love and put them back together to feel whole again. I'm your host, Chelsea Peterson, owner and clinical director of Cache Valley Counseling. Today, I am so excited to have Lindsay and Spencer Dutson join us today to talk about the labor and delivery and the befores and afters and all the things that go along with pregnancy and all of that. But more specifically, labor and delivery and how to prepare for it, how to prepare together as a couple, and how to really do this. So Lindsay and Spencer just had a new baby. I'll kind of let them introduce themselves and their family. But do you guys want to say hello and introduce us today?
Yeah, totally. So my name is Spencer. We've been married for almost 8 years. So 8 years in September. We've passed the 7-year itch, so that's good.
Yeah, you passed the 7-year itch. Congratulations.
Yeah. We are a dying breed. So I like to tell people we met in high school, dated during high school, and then got married a few years after that. Let's see, we've got 2 kids. Our oldest is 2.5, and our youngest is about 2.5 months old. So they're fun. They keep us on our toes. They're very energetic kids, I like to say. So they, high-spirited. They're always running around doing things, very independent and opinionated. Even our 2.5-month-old, right? When we put him down on his little sensory mat thing, he just he's kicking around and stuff and just can't turn it off, right? Constant. So they're great. We love them.
We like to travel. And we don't do that anymore because we have 2 kids. But we'd love to. Again, we're trying to get back into it a little bit. And mostly if we're not thinking of a trip to do or a project to do, we like to watch a show together and just kind of unwind. We're kind of more homebody. Either way not homebody or homebody. We're far from home or at home was kind of our jam. So yeah.
Very cool. Well, welcome to the podcast today. I'm so excited to kind of pick your brains on how to really prepare for labor and delivery. Again, this is you coming off your second delivery, and very recent, and sort of probably in that fog still, I would imagine, and sleep fog and sleep deprivation and all the things that go along with having a less than 3-month-old baby, as well as a 2.5-year-old toddler who's very active and very high-spirited.
Yeah.
So, really, how did you prepare for labor, both together, individually and together? What did you do as a couple to really prepare for labor, both first and even maybe some things that may be different about this second time around?
Yeah, so I think the first time around, we were caught up a lot in names and, strollers and cribs, all these things that felt like necessities. And this time around it was much different. And, you just have to kind of learn as you go. So our first time, I think we tried our best. We read some books and, I have a really great midwife, and she had recommendations for, some body work that we did. He kind of helped me with, there were some inversions I needed to do to kind of flip the baby at the end. And, he helped me with that. And I think we did our best, but we really didn't know what we were getting into or what we were doing.
Yeah. To add to that, I think one of the things we talked a lot about with the first was our schooling and stuff. And what I mean by that is I'm a therapist, and Lindsay went to school to become a preschool teacher, basically. She has a degree in child development. Mm-hmm. And so we both knew some of the statistics and numbers and that kind of stuff connected to having a first kid. As a marriage and family therapist, I know that when people have their first kid, marital satisfaction tends to go and plummet, right?
Yeah, we talked about that a lot.
So we talked about that a lot, about how okay, we know that this is going to be a thing and this is going to happen. What can we do to prepare for it? And kind of what Lindsay was saying, I think we had a lot of high hopes maybe of these are some things that we can do, or let's make sure that we go on dates still, and let's do this or let's do that. And the reality is that we just sucked at it. With our first kid, it was so hard, and granted, like, we try to give ourselves a break because our first was born in the middle of COVID. And so there was so much unknown, and we were really hesitant to do a lot of things with people or ask for help, which made it a lot harder for us and our family. But it was just really hard. And like all the stuff that we prepared for, or that we thought we were preparing for, I don't know if it helped at all. It was just like we were aware of it, and
A helpful thing to hear.
it's true though, right? And I think the point I'm getting at though is that what made the biggest difference is like the foundation of like, we're just gonna push through together,
Mhm.
and we're gonna try to figure this out together as best as we can and do our best to figure it out.
Yeah.
I do remember conversations like, because there was so much unknown, right? But you hear things and other people's experiences. And I remember telling him, there's going to be a time, there's probably going to be times when I don't want to see you. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want you to touch me. I don't want to touch you. I'm not going to want you, right? But I do want you. And I'm going to need you more than ever in those times. And I at least had the foresight that we kind of connected on that level beforehand, where it's like, are we committed to pushing through that and still fighting for each other, even when we're being just like pulled apart at every angle? And that's one thing we did right. So, yeah.
Good. Well, and I think sometimes too, again, you don't know what to expect. You sort of get caught up in maybe even the materialistic things of things like, do we have all the things, the strollers, babies need a lot, right? Babies do not need a lot. They need very, very little, but society will tell you that they need a lot, right? Like there's a lot of things you need for a baby. And so, yeah, it's hard to not get caught up in that. And then showers and, all the things that people are doing to welcome baby, which are great, but really like nuts and bolts of how are we really preparing to bring this child into our family, right? And it sounds like you guys had some good conversations of, well, we know marital satisfaction is going to take, so we're going to try to go on dates and we're going to do it. When it comes, it goes out the window. It doesn't really work, but it's good in theory. And it's good to talk about it because, again, I think as you mentioned, Spencer, foundationally, that puts you on the same page of we're doing this together and we're committed to doing this together. And even though it may not be perfect and it may not be textbook of like, this is exactly how we do it, and this is a perfect way to survive your first child and transitioning to that, you did it together, and having that foundation is really important as well.
Yeah. And
going into the labor and delivery room. Oh, Lindsay, go for it. Add to that.
You mentioned being on the same page. And I think at the end of the day, whatever we missed in our preparations, that was really something we did have those talks a lot, like same page talks.
Yeah.
Are we expecting the same thing? Are we wanting, and are we going to fight for the same thing? So in every way, and that goes into the labor and delivery. I remember I wanted to have a natural, I wanted to have an unmedicated birth. And so we had a lot of conversations about that too. But I think you're about to ask me about some of that. So
yes. Yeah. So like, how do you, particularly when it comes to labor and delivery, how do you get on the same page, right? Because particularly for women, like not ever having a child before, right? We have no idea. Like your body goes into these really like natural responses, and I have no idea how my body is going to respond, right? Like I could be really mean. I could scream at you. I could want you to hold me. I could want you to, I want to claw your eyes out. I want to, whatever. So again, like how did you, going into that, how did you prepare, for an unmedicated birth? And was that something you were both on board with right from the beginning? Or was that something that, you were able to talk to Spencer about and Spencer was able to support you? Tell me a little bit about that journey for you guys.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I feel like we were on the same page for the most part.
Yeah, I told him before we were in the process of now trying to start our family, that an unmedicated birth was something that I wanted to have. It's something I was interested in. My sister and my mom, and then really all the women before them had unmedicated births, and that was something really important to me. And so we made a birth plan. So he was like, sure, if that's what you want, then I'll support you. It's like, you're the one doing the hard work here, so I'll do it for you. And so I made a birth plan, and we did go over that quite a bit. And we talked with our provider and we talked together about that. And again, not having done it, I think we did the best we could with that. You know, I had found like some kind of a template for a birth plan or questions you should ask yourself for a birth plan. I just Googled that and found some stuff, and I just worked from there. Just answered yes or no, or what kind of things do I want, and then we just kind of prepped that and had everything. We thought we had everything ready for the for the experience. At least on paper, things look really good.
One of the things that I felt like was most helpful for me was the conversations we had about like the flexibility within the plan of like she wanted the unmedicated birth, right? But we also talked about like, I remember you saying in particular, Lindsay, like, if I change my mind when I'm in there, I want you to support me in changing that plan and not being like, well, you said you wanted an unmedicated birth, so now you can't do an epidural, right? And that like that flexibility or that understanding of like, let's be flexible when we're there was big for me, because I know that like you said, Chelsea, there was like so much stuff that like came up and that happened during the process that I think if we wouldn't have talked about that more, I think I would have struggled a lot more, when it's like, well, you wanted me to help you with these breathing things or these grounding techniques or whatever, and now you're just pushing me away, or now you're yelling at me or whatever, right?
I didn't yell.
No, she didn't yell. She was very good. But like that flexibility helped me a lot to be like, okay, I don't need to take this personal if she's wanting or needing something different now, even though we had agreed to something before. So it helped me to avoid like rigidity and stuff, which I think was very, very helpful.
Yeah, and I told him with that. I want unmedicated, but I will tell you if that changes. So it was like, don't bug me about any other options. And same with the providers that was in my plan. Do not talk to me about pain management. Like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to go as far as I can. But if that changes and when that changes, like you all are on board with me. Like, tell you I'm the boss. So that was with him. And like, don't say a word unless I tell you that I'm ready. Then we're all on to the other side of let's get into like epidural with them. So yeah, we were on this too.
Yeah. And I think that's the important thing about a birth plan. I think it's important to have those conversations. This is what I'm expecting, right? And this is what I'm hoping for, but I also need you to support me in the middle of this, particularly with my first one, because I have no idea what my pain tolerance is going to be, how my body's going to respond to this, like what I'm really going to need. And so really having that plan, but also being flexible within that plan. And what does that look like, right? There again, I think sometimes I've heard experiences of women where they don't necessarily have the flexibility conversation. And it's like, no, you stick to your birth plan. She told me she wanted a natural birth. Do not give her an epidural, even though she's screaming for one. Like, and so you definitely hear those stories. And I think it's good. It's a good reminder to be flexible while also being prepared. Yeah. Very good.
Another thought with that. I think it's already gone.
That's all right.
Yeah. So do you want me to talk about like labor experience, or are first versus second?
Especially if there was a different way, things you learned from your first and having, had that experience, your second being different. Was there a different way that you prepared, or did it work enough for you the first time around that we used a similar plan on the second?
Yeah. So the first was, I really was determined to do an unmedicated birth, and I did succeed, I suppose, but I don't want to look at it as like failure other ways, because it's all success. You give birth, it's amazing. So I did go through with an unmedicated birth, and it was traumatic. It was so hard. I'm gonna try to keep it together. And honestly, after it was all said and done, I just didn't know if I wanted to do that again. But I kind of had a rigid mindset, like, well, I did it once and now I've got to just keep doing it. I've got to be like that unmedicated mom, right? And I'm going to breastfeed and I'm going to birth my babies without drugs, right? And going into the second labor, it was a very different pregnancy. I had a lot of pain. We just, came out of the longest winter ever, like 6-7 solid months of cold and miserable, and I ended up like hardly being able to walk by the end of the pregnancy, and my energy was just taxed. Our 2-year-old was really struggling. I was really struggling, and it was just different. I was in a different place. My first great pregnancy, other than anxiety. So we lost our first pregnancy to a miscarriage. And so there was a lot of anxiety with that first of like, I just need him here. I need him to be safe. The second one, there was a little bit less of that, but a lot more of like, how am I actually, there's so much more practicality going into it. Like, I kind of know what to expect. How do I manage this with a toddler? And mentally, where do I need to be? Because every day is so hit and miss. Our son has such a hard time to sleep. And one day I feel great because we slept great and we're having a good day. And the next day I was up 10 times. And with babies, you don't know when they're going to come. I definitely threw around the idea of just getting induced at 39 weeks. He was a big baby. He was measuring really large. And so that was definitely on the table too, of being at the top of the list for, getting in here early if we wanted to. And it was a hard decision for me because I just wanted to feel like it was the right thing. And I just wasn't feeling that. And so, there was just a lot of anxiety about the practicality of things. Okay, so we have a kid. Do we have childcare lined up? Do we have other things lined up like that? And one thing that helped me, my midwife, so both times we've given birth with a certified nurse midwife in the hospital. So we birthed at Logan Regional Hospital. I'm not talking about like home birth or anything. And she mentioned that there's respite care. So anybody in Cache Valley area, the family place has 24/7 respite care or crisis care. Sorry, they also have respite care, but if there's a crisis of any kind, mental health, physical health, something happened to you or your family, or hey, you're having a baby and you don't have any childcare lined up for that exact minute of the day or night, you can actually, I'm not exactly sure how it works because we didn't have to use it, but I would definitely, that's a really important resource that gave me a lot of peace, is like, no matter what time of day or night, there's going to be somebody to take care of our 2-year-old. And, he's going to be okay. And then I can get peace, but a lot more of that. And then, do you have anything to add? I'm going for it. So then going into the birth too, I didn't do a labor plan this time because I did the unmedicated and I didn't know if I wanted that again. It was almost too much anxiety to think about what I wanted. I just wanted my baby to get here safely. And after all the pain and all the things that were already out of my control this pregnancy, I just decided. I was listening to some podcasts about peaceful birth that my midwife recommended, and I'd done some body work and like chiropractic care a little bit. I wish I'd done more in hindsight, but I did a little bit of that and some physical therapy. I was trying to do yoga at home. And the insight that really came to me as I was preparing for birth, really getting close in those last few weeks, was I just wanted to be able to feel calm, like whatever that needed to be for me, because my first was so much calm. Yeah, just I felt so out of control. I really did. There was a lot of terror. There was for his safety and for mine, and the experience of labor is so intense. It was a very long and drawn out labor. Just excruciating. I had a lot of back pain, a lot of back labor. I couldn't even move. I might as well have had an epidural, because I was basically stuck in bed, trying to birth out a very large baby, and just so many things. So this time my goal was like be in control and feel calm. And whatever that looked like, that was our birth plan that we had talked about. I was just like, I just need to feel like I wanted to stay above it. I didn't want it to be crushing me, because the first was just I felt like I was being dragged through, I don't even know, just I'm drowning at the bottom of the ocean, being dragged, through debris, and it just was like, I really thought I was going to not make it through that experience. And then this time it was like, I want to be on top of that. So if that's epidural, great. If that's keep going, it's a different experience. We'll do it unmedicated. That's great. Did you?
No.
Oh. He's tapping my leg, and I don't know if he wants to say something or if he's just tapping my leg.
Just a drummer.
He's a drummer. So the second birth was a very different experience. My son, actually, our second son, came a week early anyway, which I was so relieved because I was so anxious about him being big and, should I be induced a week early? So he came on his own, and at 6 centimeters, I really wasn't sure I could do it with unmedicated. I was having that conversation with my provider, and she's like, well, this is the best time to do it if you're going to have an epidural. And I just couldn't commit. And so at a 7, I decided I'm just not in the mental place. I'm losing control of this experience, and I can't do it like this. I don't think I have it in me. I'd labored all night and I was exhausted. So I chose to have an epidural at 7 centimeters, which in hindsight, again, I would probably do it at 6 next time or at 4 because it only numbed half of me, but it was enough to kind of take the edge off where I feel like I could still kind of be on top of it. Just enough where I wasn't drowning. And so I had maybe the different experience is also that I had maybe 20 minutes of no contractions, and then it was like go time. So my first son, it was really long and drawn out, and this experience was, my stomach contractions kind of went numb, so I got to relax, and then it was like boom, and he was pretty much here. So it wasn't a lot of relief, but it was enough that I could peacefully, kind of as peacefully as you can, birth him. So
yeah, very different experiences.
yeah.
Again, the flexibility. And really, again, like with the second one, just knowing what's my goal for this? I mean, obviously I want to get a child here and have safety, but what's my goal with this experience? And how do I prepare for that? Because it's a very different space to be in when you're preparing for peace or preparing for like having a peaceful experience with it rather than, okay, like I've got this goal of I've got to have an unmedicated birth, right? Mm-hmm. Or whatever it might be. Not that that's a bad goal. That was not a bad goal at all. It just maybe was a little more not maybe intuitive to what I needed in the moment, but more task focused instead of having that openness about really what do I want and how do I want this experience to be. Yeah. So that's important for listeners as you are listening. And if you are preparing for birth or if you're in that phase of life right now where you might be preparing, to just know that it is okay to be flexible, knowing, what kind of birth experience do I want to have? Again, very different experiences. There are some women who are like, give me an epidural, I'll have babies. I'll do labor all day long because I get an epidural. I sit in the hospital for a couple of hours until I have a new baby, and then I don't really feel anything, and labor is great, right? And there's other people who have unmedicated births who have a very similar experience to that without going into excruciating pain. I mean, I think there's every woman, especially anyone who does it unmedicated, there is a point where you're like, I can't do this. Like, I am literally going to the depths of hell and I might not survive this.
I remember come out and die or have this baby. So
yeah, that's seriously every time. And that's, at least I know for myself doing unmedicated birth, there is always a point. And it's always when in that transitional moment where it's like way too late to get an epidural. Like by the time the anesthesiologist would be in my room, the baby's here. Like it's not, it just is that point of like no return. And it's like, I can't do this, tap out. I can't get me out of this, but there is no other way but through. Like there is just no other way to get through this, but just keep going. And again, like those moments aren't great, but I tell people I feel like I can like run a marathon after, because I just feel all those endorphins and all of those good like chemicals. It is like so it was an amazing experience for me, but I also know that it can be very traumatic, because you do get to a place of like, I seriously feel like I'm going to die. And it can be kind of scary for both you and your partner. Sometimes it could be very loud, and sometimes it can be not so loud, and sometimes it can be really quiet and silent. And so there's just this continuum. And I think it's hard to, I love when women are sharing their experiences, but it's also hard to expect the same thing to happen to you, because everyone's experience is so different.
Yeah, and I want to add to that because my first was unmedicated, and I was kind of expecting that like euphoria after, and it didn't come.
Yep.
And that for me was like sealing the deal of like, I don't think I want to do this again. I'm really glad I fought for this so that I could have it and I got to experience the whole thing for myself. I really wanted to own that birth because I did not get to birth my first pregnancy, my first child. And so that's what I wanted. Like I wanted that to be mine, totally mine. And it was, and it wasn't what I thought it would be. And I think a lot of the trauma came from that. I bled a lot after, and there was a lot of aftercare that semi-emergent because of the bleeding. And just, I never ever experienced that like euphoria. I never even like, I'm like, what is this? I just gave birth. I feel terrible. I'm like a zombie. Even when they put it on my chest, I was so exhausted and so beside, just kind of out of my mind, like that. I was just like a baby. Like I don't understand. This is this my baby? Like I couldn't even connect with him. And yeah, that's a big game changer for me. With the second one, it's like that might happen again, and you might as well be more well rested. So
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And if that's how getting an epidural to help me connect with my baby and have that peaceful feeling and stay in this peaceful place, rather than having maybe things get so chaotic and so feeling like I'm being dragged under the ocean and can't get out, like that's an exhausting experience. And so every experience is different. And again, being able to recognize and not get so pigeonholed into, well, I've committed to doing this unmedicated birth and I am going to have every child this way, no matter what. But again, being able to pivot and know for yourself that wasn't necessarily a good thing, that it's your experience and you owned it. But for this next one, I want a different experience. And how do we make that experience different? And with your next one, you build on all of the experiences together. Yeah. And then your third one will throw a wrench in everything, because you think, oh, I think we've got it now. And your third one will say, no, you don't. And it just happens. It just does.
Well, I think owning how my first experience went, because I hear experiences like yours, and I'm like, do I even admit that I didn't feel that and that I didn't like, and it was hard for me to come to terms with that for a while. And actually before my second birth, part of the preparation, I did do some EMDR therapy about my birth experience. And that made a big difference for me in feeling like I could do it again. Because I remember that last month before my second, I was just like breaking down and having panic attacks about like, I cannot be in that space again. I cannot, I can't do it. And that was before I'm even in the space, and I'm not going to be able to survive that. And so that's where a lot of that insight for me came of like, you don't have to do that. And I wanted to talk too about finding a provider who listens to you and who honors you is so important. And providers work for you. You can cancel, you can quit them anytime, fire them, whatever you want. You can walk out. I've never had to do it, so I know that takes some grit that I haven't had to do. I haven't had to experience that, but so important. It really made all the difference for me, because my wonderful provider after this delivery, because she knew how traumatic my first was, she was like, so you're traumatized again? We can have some more EMDR ahead. And I was like, maybe. Like that was really hard. It was, even with half epidural, it was kind of the worst thing ever. And I'm just not sure I can do it again, but I want to have more kids. And she said, you don't have to even do it vaginally. You can have a scheduled C-section. And And just even that, because you're like, okay, well, as long as so I'm not going to be medicated, but then I am, as long as I can avoid a C-section. And there's just so many things that you're trying to avoid in labor sometimes. But having her be like, there's nothing wrong with that. Women all the time choose that for their mental and physical, health, to feel like you have some control and you're not going to have to do that again. But you can still get your family here. And that was just really eye-opening for me. That's something I actually am thinking about for the next one. Like, I don't know if I'll really go through with starting that way, but if things change, and she said that too, even in the delivery room after the epidural, she was like, if you need to change things up, it's your call. And so, I think that made all the difference.
Yeah.
And I think I could not agree with you more, having a provider who really will listen to you and will support you in whatever you're feeling, because I think so often, again, people get pigeonholed into, this is the labor I'm expecting, right? I'm expecting an unmedicated delivery. I'm expecting to not have to have a C-section. I'm expecting, and they get so rigid and so pigeonholed into thinking this is how it's going to go, that their provider doesn't always listen to those shifts, or as people are listening to their bodies and saying, okay, I don't think I can do this anymore. I don't think this is right for me. They, again, sometimes are like supposed to be the supportive partner, but it's like, no, you said you wanted this, so I'm sticking you to it. Like, and they need to be able to be flexible in that moment as well. And a good provider really can read that and say, you know what, I'm concerned about your mental health for these reasons. And you being able to also be open with your provider in all the visits that you do before. Yes, those are great, checkups and check on the baby and physical nature, but also the emotional side of things too, right? Should really be about you getting to know your provider and your provider getting to know you, things that I'm worried about, things I'm concerned about, right? And being able to talk about the fact that I, needed to do EMDR to be able to be in a space, to be able to find peace with this birth. And maybe that still wasn't enough. And maybe the next one will look different. Maybe it will look the same. Maybe it will look, it's all, again, that flexibility is really important as well. So I want to ask you a question, Linz. How did you how did you know that you needed EMDR? Having a husband who is also a mental health therapist who also does EMDR might be helpful. But if someone doesn't have that and doesn't have that as a resource, what would you suggest to them? What things did they look out for that EMDR or some sort of maybe more specific EMDR work might be beneficial for them before they go into labor?
Yeah, I think if there's any kind of body trauma, that's your first sign, even if it's your first birth, but you've had some trauma in any way, especially sexually or anything else. If something doesn't feel right, or like things are getting stuck, wherever that is. I kept getting stuck so I was doing a birth meditation, like a hypnobirthing thing. Mm-hmm. And I had a full-blown panic attack in the middle of a hypnobirthing session because I realized I would have to be there again, right? And that's when I talked to Spencer, and I'm like, I cannot do this. Like, that was my first indicator that I knew my birth was traumatic, but that it was really going to be affecting the next birth. And so I just talked to him, and we talked through it, and he's like, yeah, I think you might really benefit from that. And as far as resources, I'm very lucky to have him to always bounce things off of. But talk to your provider. Start there. If you've got a good provider who will listen to you, they should have some resources for you. And EMDR was very helpful because I got to go to this specific event, right? And I worked through that, and it went from getting stuck, panic attacks, can't do it, can't move. Like, that's where my mind was, can't do it, like stuck. Just terror and panic. And it went from that to being able to say, like, this is going to be hard, but I get to make my choices, and I'm going to do the best that I can. And I know it's going to be hard. I'm sure I'll get to some really dark places again, but not those ones. This is a different experience. It's kind of a fresh slate, and being able to move through that trauma. So it was a big deal for me. And I know, like, Cache Valley Counseling you can have discovery visits where you can, you guys still do that? Okay. Just go on a call every time. If you feel like that's something you need, there, like Spencer does EMDR, and there's others in the valley that I'm sure would meet with you, or you can at least talk with their office about what that looks like cost-wise, and ideas for treatment or visits, how you want that to look, because my provider was super on board with that. And she said herself, she wishes that more people would explore things like that as an option and take birth trauma as a real trauma. I mean, I think people tend to minimize, like, oh, you're safe, your baby's here. That was hard. Birth's always hard. It's, it's so tough. My gosh, I know. I thought I was going to die too. And I'm like, yeah, I think it's a little deeper for me. And if you're feeling that way, then just start there. You don't need any more proof than how you feel.
Yeah. Yeah. So really for you, it was that panic. It was that experience for you that, like, I am putting myself back into trying to prepare for this next birth. And it's throwing me into having panic. And instead of being able to move through that, I needed to have some EMDR therapy around that specific event to be able to move through it. Spencer, anything from your perspective as in being a trauma therapist and doing EMDR that you saw from Lindsay that was the kind of the befores and afters? I mean, she talked about having the panic and then not going to that panic place after. Again, it didn't make it all better, but it made it at least more doable as far as it didn't incite panic. It didn't ignite that as soon as she started thinking about being in labor again. Any other kind of thoughts from you as far as when someone would reach out to EMDR, particularly around birth trauma, or any other instances that you might see that might be helpful for people?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Lindsay was spot on with most of what she said. Like, listening to the body, I think, is the key, because our bodies are what store the trauma. And so being aware of, like, the way the body reacts when you imagine putting yourself in that same place, right? Like, if people are having a lot of anxiety about going into labor, and they can kind of pinpoint that back to a past labor experience or a past thing related to, like Lily said, even connected to like sex, or connected to getting pregnant, or connected to those things, you probably want to give space for that, because the body creates that unease in us, right? That tells us this is threatening, so we should back off, right? Avoid it, or cope with it, or get away from it in some way. And by dealing with it, you allow yourself to kind of step into it with more ease, or a sense of like a lightness about it, right? And that's what I noticed in her that was, like, I think the biggest indicator that what she had done was helpful, is that, like, she was able to talk about it more without getting even like significantly emotional, right? Like, she maybe would feel like a little bit of distress connected to it, but it was very much different. And that is a good indicator that it worked, right? Because the body reacted differently to it. And I think, like Lindsay was saying, birth trauma is kind of like, at least in the United States, kind of like a universally minimized traumatic experience.
Absolutely.
You compare it to like other things, and like people just don't do what they do with pregnancy trauma that they do with other types of trauma as often, right? Because like when they said, oh, well, like it's always hard. So like, it's like it's like this right of motherhood almost, right? Of like, we have to, if you got that trauma, like, great, here's your badge of honor, and like you just live with it. But I don't think it should ever be that way. And so those are some of the things that I think to kind of look out for, mostly like the body and how it's reacting in those moments and in those places, because the body always will tell us. And if you're unsure of your body because you've got anxiety, right? People who have anxiety, it's like, listen to your body, and they're like, my body tells me I'm dying, so I don't know what it's telling me, right? Yeah.
I'm in a constant panic all the time.
Yeah, talking to your provider is huge, because they can help ground you a little bit, see it from the outside in, and start to suggest some things that could potentially help.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to know, even after that, yours happened to come when you were preparing for labor again. But oftentimes I've heard women talk about after labor. Spencer, you mentioned sex life after it. There was a birth trauma that you go through of like, oh, I don't want to ever go through that again. And this is what got me here. And my body's connecting this and sort of protecting me of like, I don't even want to engage in sex anymore with my partner. Not only because of the sleep fog that I'm experiencing from having a newborn and all of those things, but also this kind of almost unrecognized like birth trauma that doesn't get talked about enough of, particularly when it comes to sexual intimacy with your partner after you've had labor and delivery or after you've been through labor, right? It can also be the other way. It can be also very traumatizing for the male partners who are not birthing a child to have experienced or witnessed their partner go through this really intense thing and push a baby out of them and go, okay, now we're supposed to want to have sex and do this again and create more life. Like, I'm not sure I want to do that again. I don't want to put you in that place. And so sometimes, again, trauma is different for everybody, as we've talked about in other podcasts, but particularly with labor and delivery trauma, it can go both ways and can very much affect your partnership and your relationship.
Yeah, I also want to touch on there's so much more trauma that can come from just labor. I specifically have heartbeat trauma because that's how we found out that we lost our first pregnancy. We were fairly far along. We thought we were out of the woods and there was just no heartbeat. And so with all my pregnancies, I have like, when they're like, oh, we can take that fetal monitor off, when it comes to labor. And I'm like, I cannot, I have to hear that this whole time or I won't be able to keep going. And so, just have grace with yourself. The whole process is so intense. Just start to finish. The more I talk to people, the more I realize it's more uncommon to be like, oh, we got pregnant, we had a baby. It was no big deal. It's like, it's a very big deal. And you have the right to own that. You have the right to say, yeah, that was really intense for me. But even more, there's breastfeeding trauma. Even if things go well, obviously if things don't go well and there's lasting damage to your body or you lose your baby, those are just things that are a whole nother conversation, but say things go well, you can't breastfeed, but you wanted to. That is traumatic. And that can also affect, intimacy later. There's so much in your body. I tore with both of my deliveries and I had stitches. There's a real physical trauma that I had to make sure I was healed. And even then, there was a lot that went on. Even if I wanted something sexually, my body didn't want it. Even if my mind wanted, I'm like, I don't know though. My body's like, no, I don't have a lot going on down there. I don't know if we're ready for that, And just kind of balancing your inner self and your outer self and all of the parts that came together for that and the healing after that. We need to just normalize how intense and how life-changing these experiences are instead of normalizing them by, oh, everyone's done it. Everyone's gotten through it,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Great points. Yeah. So how do you guys prioritize your relationship? How do you work through the trauma of, you have a 3.5-month-old or 2.5-month-old, not even 3-month-old, and just coming off another second delivery, and a 2.5-year-old at home who's very busy. And how do you prioritize your relationship? How do you get through that, continue on the healing journey after your second delivery?
Yeah, I think one of the things that stands out the most to me especially when I compare the two experiences is having good community connections and have a good support system. Because, with our first, we really just could not give a lot of time and energy to our relationship because so much of our time and energy was dedicated to taking care of this kid who had a lot of issues at the beginning.
We really struggled. So, not all newborns are struggle like ours did. He was in a lot of pain and reflux, and he really only slept 30 minutes to an hour at a time. So it was very draining kind of going into this. It's always draining. We had a newborn that has less issues with pain and it's still draining, but yeah.
And so we didn't have, that time to really dedicate to our relationship. Because honestly, we were just surviving for like the first year and a half. And then last, that time between, year and a half and 2 years, it got a little bit better. And then 2 years was like a real game changer for us in a lot of ways. But with our second, like really just saying yes to all kinds of supports and helps and asking for people to help and support us. So we've done things like we've connected with a couple of people in our neighborhood to do like baby swaps where we'll take their kids while they go on a date for like even just like an hour, right? Even just to go grocery shopping without kids, right? And then yeah. And then we'll switch, right? And that's been very, very helpful. We've asked our parents to help because we're very fortunate that both of our parents here live very close. And so asking our parents more to watch our kids periodically as well to enable us to kind of do things and get that support because we just didn't feel like we could ask at the beginning, or we didn't feel like it was a good thing to ask because of COVID and all the complications with that and just the newness of being parents and all that. And yeah, this time around, like that social support that we got from other people, I think has been the most helpful thing as it comes to giving our relationship time because we've always wanted that, like we feel that missing, but like the logistics of making it happen just always got in our way. And so we had to go outside of our comfort zone a little bit, I think, in asking for that help and requesting that help and saying yes to people when they wanted to help us because we're so independent that we tend to do most things on our own anyways. And so that's like the thing that I think made the biggest difference, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I actually intentionally this time, I was like, this is going to be a yes time in my life. So if people are offering things to me, I'm saying yes. Like I'm trying to invite abundance and get out of my comfort zone. So and if people are like, let me know if I can bring something, that often just kind of slides away and you could forget. But I've been like, yes, please bring me dinner on Wednesday. And if people don't want to offer things that they don't mean to me, they're going to learn really quick that I'm going to probably take them up on that offer. So that was, we went from a culture of no. Like, no, we don't want you to do that. No, we've got it. No, don't step into this space. It's just too messy, right? And putting up walls. And this time, like, my sisters came over, I think day 2, and I'm up there in like pumping bra and the mesh undies. I mean, I'm a hot mess. And they just sat on my bed and talked with me. And I would not have let anybody do that the first time, but I was lonely. People were here to visit the baby. And I'm like, well, if they want to come visit me, I would love that. I want to talk to people too. I just look like this. So I'm only going to invite people that I feel safe with in my space. But yeah, I just went to yes. Even like when people brought us food and someone's like, hey, I've got more food. Could you use it? And I couldn't. I was just like, yes. And I froze it, for later. And instead of being like, oh, we're good, it was just yes every time. And it's really made a big difference. And I know that not everybody has that kind of support. And maybe you don't have people who you feel safe in your space. I do also want to plug again for the family place here in Logan, because they have respite care on top of crisis care, where depending on your situation, they can work out, I think, up to 2 hours a week of respite care where you'll work out like a timeline that works for everybody, but give yourself a break. Say yes to the resources that are around you, whatever that looks like, and don't do it on your own. There's no medal there is no prize for how far you dug yourself into a hole saying that you didn't need help when you really did. We all need help. There's not a single new parent who doesn't need help. So.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. And I think that's a great reminder to those who might be listening, because there is no medal, there's no prize, and it doesn't help your kid any if I'm stressed and overwhelmed, if I can't continue to show up for them. So use your resources and say yes to those around you if they're offering to help, or when they do offer to help, because it is. I think that's societally maybe some pressure that we get of like, oh, I can take care of my baby on my own, or I can, raise these kids on my own. I don't need any help, but really asking for help, because it really, truly does. It takes a village to raise children. It does.
Yeah, and another thing that we did differently this time is my toddler's been struggling a lot, and I just realized I can't do it on my own, even with the after hours help, when people are off of work. It was during the days that I was losing it, like by noon, I was like, I'm done with the day, and I have nothing left to give my children. And that's just not a good place to be. And so we talked about it and we adjusted some things in our family budget and made some room for hiring help. Because I'm like, there's nobody who can come during the day. I don't have any like teenage neighbor girls or anything, or boys or girls or anybody there's a lot of young families and a lot of older folks where we're living. And I made a care.com profile and I hired some help. It's not a ton, it's like a few hours a week, but it's a game changer for me because I needed time during the day to get things done. And that's what I bought that for myself. Like, you're allowed to do what you need to do. And I talked to my provider about that in my 6-week follow-up, and she's like, we think about our ancestors or the pioneers and how, they did it all themselves, and I should just be able to do it too. But she's like, the funny thing is, she was saying her husband's grandma, great grandma, somebody, when she turned 14, she went and hired herself out and was like the mother's help. And that was so common that you actually had hired help or family come and stay with you for the first few years after your babies or the whole time, and you shared a household. It really, people were not doing it by themselves, even when you thought they were.
Yeah, and people had their parents living with them because that's how the culture was, like, you couldn't survive, right? If you were an aged person, you had to live with your kids, right? And so then you would take care of their kids, right? And yeah, it was very different back then.
And even the American culture is very isolating compared to many other cultures in the world. Many other cultures still have their parents living with them when they're older, and they don't move far away from home. They live in the same village or the same town or the same city or the same, and they definitely function as not necessarily even tribal, but they function more in that kind of small, close-knit communities. And we have help. And us as Americans, I don't think, do us any service by trying to do things on our own and, trying to win these badges for doing all the things. But it is so important also to get that time for yourself, Linz. And so like those things of being able to say, like, I need just 2 hours, and whether that's 2 hours that I'm taking a nap, or 2 hours that I'm going grocery shopping, or 2 hours that I'm just like not having anyone calling my name or toddling after me or doing anything for anyone, just 2 hours to just read a book or whatever. Right. And I also think that even if people do hire help or they do have help, sometimes they feel guilty about, well, I've got to get all these things done while I'm seeing some things there too. It's not about the things like hiring help to get something done or be productive, right? It's how do I set myself up for success going back so that I'm more rested and more myself. And maybe that is being productive. Maybe, doing something for myself is being productive in some way. Maybe that's cleaning my house so that I can have more focus. Maybe that's going grocery shopping. Maybe that's producing work of some sort. Maybe that's reading a book. Maybe that's taking a nap. Maybe that's whatever it is, making sure that you're going back and you're using those resources to really help you feel rested, because it's such an unrestful time of life.
It's true. So, we do so much fighting for our kids and advocating and working for them. Give some of that to yourself, because when I come back after my babysitter takes care of my kid for a couple hours, and like you said, sometimes I cannot focus because my house is so dirty, and that's what I do. And sometimes I nurse my baby in peace and quiet, without somebody trying to jump on us. And I haven't napped yet. I'm not at that level, but I have a list of things that are making me crazy. I'm working through those. When I kind of get that minimized, I will be napping during some of this time. But when I come back together with my kids, I have more to give. I'm not done by noon. I can go all day and I feel way more grounded. And when he gets home after a long day of helping people with their issues, and I have more to give him. And I think it's helped our relationship. And it's overall, what's worse? Like, where's the guilt coming from? Is it worse to ask for help and admit that you need help and find a way to make something happen for you? Or is it worse to have nothing to give your kids and your family and yourself and fall apart? That's where I was. It's not worse. I mean, getting help is not worse. It's, if you can fight for it and find the resources to make it happen for you, it's really important. Just you're important, your priorities matter, your rest matters.
Yeah. And there's no badge of being a super mom if you don't ask for help ever. I think, again, sometimes you're in a worse off situation than if you were to just ask for help. So, well, guys, thank you so much. Any last parting words to those who are preparing for birth and preparing for labor and the befores and afters and all the nitty gritties that go with labor and delivery? Any parting words of wisdom?
Yeah, I did want to add with labor and delivery, you can have a plan and it's not going to go to plan probably, right? And if your plan is like going out of 4 epidural, sail through, I still am going to ask you to have a pain management plan, because when I got my epidural, I was like, I can't do it. I'm doing it. I was only half numb. I felt very much of that labor. You need to make sure you have your bases covered. Like, not to scare anyone, but honestly, a lot of people whose epidurals don't work were blindsided and didn't know that could happen and didn't know that they needed other options, right? It's like, oh, epidural fixes everything. Well, it really doesn't for everyone. And it's only designed to take like 80% of the pain. You really need a backup plan. And so do the body work, like talk to your provider still about like coping and having them support you in whatever you need, because you just want to be in a place where it's going to be hard, but you've got what you need to get through it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think for me to kind of more particularly target the men who might be listening to this, if there are any who ever listen to this, it would be to slow down. Don't try to fix it. There's nothing to fix. Just slow it down. Just be with your partner. That's what matters the most. Be flexible. I think it's easy to take things personally, right? Like when reactions happen, it's like, oh, that feels like personal, or not, honoring me, or what about me, or whatever, but like not personal. And caring more about your spouse than you care about yourself. I mean, I think that's just general good practice for any relationship, but in the process of getting pregnant and labor, delivery, all the post stuff, trying to forget yourself a little bit and focus on your spouse's needs and where they're at. Because as you get through just like that phase, if you will, whatever that looks like for you, things will normalize later. But if you make it too much about you, coming from like the male perspective, then it's going to cause like so many more, like, I think, bumps that then make it hard to come back together when you're through that phase of newborn or whatever that looks like, right? But those would be my parting words of wisdom.
Yeah, I have one more thought. I'm sorry, we were talking a lot, but as far as connection goes, with that first, we just couldn't, and we didn't. We still are not in the habit of like going on dates because we just never did with our first. I could say I regret that because I do, but I don't hold it against our past selves. The place we were in, I have grace. I have a lot of compassion for the past Spencer and Lindsay and what we were going through. As much as I'm frustrated that we don't have those habits, but one thing we did do, we really try to be mindful about when a toddler escalation or a baby screaming or the fact that we haven't been able to talk all day, when that's starting to feel personal instead of what's going on, right? Because we all escalate, we all kind of, oh my gosh, get this baby to stop crying. I can't handle it anymore. And we all get those places. We've gotten really good at like tapping out, like honestly, tap out. I can't, right? I'm done. And giving ourselves space. But even at the end of the day, say we've had no connection and we've been screamed at all day and I'm covered in who knows what, and he's had a hard day at work, and we're laying in bed and we don't have another ounce of energy to even talk. I feel I try to like reach over, from across the babies and like just touch him. And just like, I see you. I saw you today. I love you. Even if I don't say those words, just having something that connects you, where it's like, I might cry myself to sleep because I miss my husband who's 2 feet away from me in bed with the babies in between it, or, you know, because toddlers can't stay in their own beds. And, but just like that touch, like find something that, if it's a word or if it's touch, if it's a hug, sometimes we don't get a hug in for the day, but just connect. It's not you versus each other. It's not you versus the kids. It's everybody doing their best, and we're a team, no matter how much we got to experience that teamness today. But I'm still here. You're still here. We know what we're working for. So we know what we're fighting for, which it's our family.
This has been very enlightening and very, I think if anybody who is preparing for labor is listening to this, they'll find a lot of great information in this. And again, I hope that anyone who is listening knows that you are not alone. People have been through this. Ask questions, ask yourself questions, just do the work, because it helps both pre and post. And even though it doesn't go exactly as planned, it never goes exactly as planned. It helps. Every little bit helps. And ask for help and continue to connect, because that's the most important thing, right? If at the end of the day, even if we go days without even hugging because we're split in 2 different directions, being able to really, again, that sameness, that togetherness, that being on the same page, really at the end of the day really is what matters. And finding some sort of way to be reminded of that is incredibly helpful. So thank you, Dudsons, for all of your words of wisdom. And we'll see you again next time on The Puzzle of Us.
Thank you.
Thank you.